Hey folks, Zach Osterman, Mike Niziolek, Bloomingdale Times, Indianapolis Star, Indiana 70, Nebraska 85. A game of extremes, obviously, Mike. Most of them against Indiana. Indiana was just kind of nowhere in the first half. They got caught up in Nebraska's pace. They lost all kind of touch with their defense. They gave up 51 points, which is just a huge number in a college game, particularly, quite frankly, in a conference that is typically a sort of pace the way the Big Ten is. Then they score 25 points in the first 8.5 minutes of the second half. They get it down to 3. The building's on fire. And then I think they only scored 14 points the last 11.5 minutes of the game. And, there's kind of the intangibles, which is, getting to a place where you aren't falling behind by 20, where you aren't struggling so much on defense, those kinds of things. But there's also, the stuff that builds this, which is, for example, Indiana's 4 of 21 from 3. Indiana's 14 of 24 from the free throw line. When you can't score consistently, you will get yourself into situations on nights like tonight where it feels like you've got to be almost perfect to win games. And that's where it feels like Indiana is now.
Yeah, it's hard to know where to start. I mean, you look at that first half, one halftime down 51-31, gave up 9 3-pointers. Mike Woodson has said this team plays well in spurts, but to me the concern is why they're not learning these lessons, right? Like, okay, at a point in the season where you've done this a half dozen times, gone like a whole half, or come out flat in a game, you just haven't been able to find anything, and maybe it speaks to your point that they just don't have a reliable enough offense to be able to do that, right?
Well,
They can't rely on the free throw line. You can't rely on the 3-pointer.
You weren't here for Witz's first season. There were times, and I remember writing this, there were times in that season where it felt like Indiana had a level of recognition that basically there were games where it was only going to be competitive if it just defended for its life. That there's an extent to which, and that team wasn't a great team by any means. It was limited. It was obviously it was the product of coaching turnover, all this kind of stuff. But that team figured out somewhere along the way, we can defend at this level. I think they were a top 30 defense by the end of the season in adjusted efficiency. And basically, if we don't defend at this level, it's going to be really hard for us to win games. But I think this team... I don't think this team can defend that well, and I think it doesn't have anything to compensate at the other end of the floor.
They care too much about missed shots. They seem to get deflated when the offense is struggling. And Mike Woodson's talked about that. That's part of the youth. That's part of and Trey Galloway, I think, has mentioned that. Kate Cubs mentioned that when they're not in a rhythm, when they don't have a rhythm on offense, it sort of affects the rest of their play. And so, everything kind of goes down the toilet, and you saw in that first half basically did. And they can't, like you said, they can't dig yourself out a 20-point hole, especially when teams, even if Nebraska hits they only had 5 3-pointers in the second half, but I mean that's all they needed to really extend the game. Well, they've built up such a big cushion.
And it's one of those things where people, I think, sort of assume these things. That in people's minds sometimes these things aren't interrelated. If you hit some of those shots, you probably don't give up 51 points because your confidence stays up. There's more momentum. There's some energy in the building. It feels a little bit more back and forth. And it's to your point with this team in particular, it just seems like it snowballs quickly when they get into a situation where they start to recognize that their offense isn't going to be enough and their defense probably isn't going to be enough. And they just, they just kind of disconnect. I mean, what is the phrase they were using? Like losing touch or not?
Losing touch.
Yeah. They just sort of like have these, and again, that's what young teams do. That's what teams that, it's one of these sort of self-fulfilling prophecies that when teams start to struggle, they start to lack confidence. When they start to lack confidence,
if you want to talk an example
it.
about that.
But to your point, it's February 21st. If that's not going to get fixed now,
you're out of time. But to your point, and I think you mentioned this the other day in one of your stories, maybe it was after Northwest again, the self-fulfilling prophecy, especially related to the free throw line. Khalil Ware missed 2. He was like visibly shook, like just frustrated and angry at himself, and just sort of, and you could see it that this has now become, what was it in the game, 5 of 13 from the free throw line, that this issue has now sort of, I think, become all consuming with the team and sort of indicative of kind of where else they've struggled, that now this is they seem to be encountering more mental blocks and not knocking them down as the season progresses.
Yeah, and it just sort of feels like things have kind of moved in like a certain direction in terms of, you got guys that are sort of falling back on bad habits, like Malik Renew, who had kind of gotten the foul trouble out of his game earlier
And now
in
it's
the
just come
season.
back in just absolute vengeance.
Trey Galloway has some good nights. I've been one of the people that said, hey, he's been pretty good distributing the basketball. Tonight, 3 assists, 6 turnovers. There were undeniably some moments when he was really kind of forcing, I think, the offense and
tentative to shoot the ball.
Well, I would say tentative to shoot the ball, but it felt like it was as much him thinking, okay, what I am now is the guy that creates for everybody else, and if I get everybody else involved, then the offense is moving.
There was that one point where he got so far, he drove, and he was he had like jumped, and he was like out of bounds. Like that was not something a player that we've seen him. And make.
That's all of this is just the sign of a team that just doesn't have a lot of belief in itself, and it's and
then when you're losing games at home and the teams and you're getting booed, which is fair. I'm not saying it's not fair. It doesn't help the situation. It makes everything.
And the free throw, the temperature level in this building rises by 2. Rises by 2 degrees every time Indiana goes to free throw. And this is a weird reference, but there's that old Keanu Reeves movie, The Replacements, where he talks about the idea of quicksand, and he just says you do one thing wrong. You're fine. Everything's fine. But then you do one thing wrong, and you try to compensate for it, and then you do something else wrong.
Field trip where they go watch the movie.
Why would they need a field trip for that?
Go see it on a big screen or something. Team bonding is what I'm saying.
I'm sure they have a big screen where they watch film.
Yeah, but that's not good for movies. Do you think the audio is good?
I don't think that's going to fix much of it.
Trip?
The point is that's where it feels.
Oppenheimer?
That's where it feels like Indiana is right now. It's just everything is affected by this underlying lack of confidence, lack of faith, maybe to a certain extent lack of trust. I don't think that there's not an outward sort of dysfunction with this team, but if you see yourself struggling and then you see your teammates struggling, you're naturally just sort of going to think, oh, geez, maybe none of us can fix this. And it just kind of feels like Indiana's at a place where it's going to be really hard. I think they're 4-9. Am I right? Since Big Ten play resumed, they've lost 3 in a row at home here for the first time since Archie Miller's last season in 2021. It feels like it's very late in the day for them to find some fix for that in any meaningful way this season.
Well, they've been demonstratively worse on the road too. So now they go back on the road to Penn State. Really kind of desperate need of a win just to kind of get out of the spiral. And Penn State's team that just came back and had that crazy comeback victory over Illinois. So they're in a tough spot because they desperately need some good things to happen. But right now they just lack that sort of, like you said, the confidence, the firepower, everything about it. And this is not an easy road here in the last, 5 games left?
Yeah. We'll leave it there. Indiana's 14-12, 6-9 in the Big Ten. They are at Penn State on Saturday, then Wisconsin home midweek next week. For the Louisville Journal-Times, the Indianapolis Star, Mike Niziolek and Zach Osterman. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for watching all these. If you make it this far, thank you for watching all these. We do appreciate it. I know it's not exactly been maybe appointment viewing for a lot of people, but we do appreciate it. So, thank you. Have a good night. We'll talk to you soon.